All right, what's up, guys? Uh, Welcome to Simple Shit, where we look at seemingly complicated political and social issues, and then we break them down into just their most simple terms in order to get a firm understanding of what they really are, right? The format's going to change. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name's Alvin, creator of this thing, and it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. So this show is built and or designed to is built and designed to pull back the shades and help us have a better and a more firm understanding of what's actually happening in our society. So let's get started. First things first, what I really want to do for today is I want to start by talking about narrative. I'm not going to dig super duper deep into it, but I think sometimes people don't understand how important narrative really is. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go to good old Google, and we're going to just look up narrative. Do some of this work on your own, right? It's not difficult to just Google a word and do a little bit of research. Sometimes the answers that you seek are only a click or two away from you. We walk around with supercomputers in our pockets. So why not, right? All right, so here's what we got going on. Narrative, right? A spoken or written account of connected events, a story. The hero of this modest narrative. The reason why I wanted to start with narrative as being one of the words that I wanted to use is because the narrative is the story that you hear when you hear about a certain thing, correct? If you hear a story, whether or not you get any actual facts or not, that generally sets the tone for how you receive that story. And based on your sources will determine how firmly you hang on to those. Everything around us has some sort of a story, right? Or an account of what they are. Generation X, there's a narrative around Generation X. Generation Z, there's a narrative around Generation Z. And what I'm getting at is that there's a narrative around African Americans. That narrative is often motivated by racism. And where there is no racism, there is usually a financial gain or benefit. In our society, these narratives can be particularly harmful. And we will start with the most basic, how African American men are. The narrative is African American men are criminals or prone to criminality. Now, this narrative goes all the way back to slavery, obviously, but what I want to focus on today is a little bit more insidious and a little more current to our current situation. In my own experience, the news that I had been consuming, I was seeing or feeling like there was an abundance of the anti-Asian hate was being directed at African Americans. And it was subtle. It wasn't that everyone came out specifically and said, hey, it's only Black people. But what was happening was that the video clips that we saw were generally of Black people beating up old Asian ladies and men. And those were all the videos that we saw. There was one particular story. This one is famous. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about this one in particular, and we're not going to record any video, we're just going to take a look at it. But the reason why I want this one in particular is because, in the same vein that we watched all of these African Americans beating up on these old Asian people for whatever reason, and that's never okay. This one in particular, this woman was beaten up by a white man. Now, the interesting thing about this is that she fought back, she beat him off, And this is the video, these are the clips. Now, somehow, some way, the actual clip of the attack wasn't captured, or at least it wasn't made public. However, there is a split second you can see the perpetrator. Oh, let's see if they find him, because they keep stopping the video or cutting away from the video before they show the man that actually did the harm. Now, she's crying, so on and so forth, and the reality is that even up until this point, you still don't see the perpetrator. Well, the perpetrator is on a gurney right there. Here we go. Okay, let's blow this up so that everybody can see this nice and clear. Now, this is the guy that attacked this woman. This guy right here. Now, this guy attacked this woman, and this is the only image of him that you can find. This one right here. It's a quick second where they pan over to show him, and then they go back to her again. If I'm not mistaken, this woman and everyone else, which more power to them, raised over $1 million to dedicate to fighting Asian hate. They use this woman as the reason or the poster child for anti-Asian hate. This is the perpetrator, but his images are nowhere to be found. Instead, being used are video of African American men sucker punching and or robbing old Asian women and men. So they use her story, but the images that they use are from Black people. And I found this particularly upsetting. Now, I came across some information recently, and I'm going to go on ahead and try to make this quick. This is going to be the end of the video. And again, just thought-provoking. I had a theory about these crimes, and part of the reason why Asians and Blacks are in such close proximity is because Asians immigrating to this country, they usually try to find the least expensive or cheapest places to live, at least at first. Those happen to be in close proximity to African American communities. They also start businesses in African American communities. Now, what people don't like to talk about is that these Asians, these immigrants, come into these neighborhoods and start businesses in places where Black folks don't have the ability to start businesses in their own neighborhood. And I always thought this was weird as a child, being in the hood, but it was the corner store was always owned by an Asian person or an Indian person. The best wings or Chinese food, or the best food in the neighborhood was always the Chinese food, or the best wings in the neighborhood were always from the Chinese spot. And I could never understand why. And then as I start to understand how the world works, I understood, okay, I see why those places are there. So then it begs the question, you have a impoverished neighborhood, someone that moves in out of the country that isn't even from here, has a business here. And to be completely honest with you, I've never met an Asian friend, and I have a lot of Asian friends, that told me that their parents weren't racist. Every single Asian friend that I have ever had told me that either their parents and or grandparents were very racist against Black people. So we get followed around stores, we get mistreated, you move into Black neighborhoods, you don't treat Black people with respect, so there is obvious resentment. And if those people in impoverished neighborhoods don't have resources or funds, and you happen to be walking down the street, there's a good chance you might get robbed, whether you're Asian or not. However, the type of attack that we're talking about here in San Francisco, where this gentleman just beat this lady up, was not a crime of opportunity, or was not a crime of need or opportunity. It was a crime of hate. And there is a subtle difference. And I think that neither one is okay, but I think that we definitely need to start to differentiate between the two. Now, to the very last part of what I wanted to get at. So this came across my desk, and it basically says perpetrators of anti-Asian violence are predominantly white. They are not Black people. Now, we're passing these anti-Asian racism legislation, And I would be willing to bet, I'm not going to get into the details because I think for this particular channel, we're going to try to keep things above the weeds. We're not going to get into the weeds with all of these things. Generally what happens is when legislation gets passed, anti-anything, chances are the way that it works, it will be almost purely directed at African Americans or minority communities. For example, stop and frisk in New York. Sure, stop and frisk is a rule for all of New York, but it was only the New York cops that did that with the minority youth. And you can look that up. So similarly in that way, I would expect that this anti-Asian legislation that just got passed would be indirectly pointed at African Americans or minorities. But since that's the case, I really want to look at this really quick, and then we're going to end this video. The perpetrators of anti-Asian violence are predominantly white. This disproves a popular yet anti-Black and misinformed narrative that the Black community is driving the current epidemic of anti-Asian racism. Basically, 679 incidents of anti-Asian harassment and vandalism, 344 incidents of stigmatizing and discriminatory statements, images, policies, and proposals. Now, what those numbers, how big those numbers are, plus or minus, from their, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the description below so that you can take a look at this on your own time. But what I will say is that, I'm going to dig in myself, I already have, but I'll probably do a little bit more on this. But now, one of the more interesting things, while in most articles the race of the assailant was not available, in 184 of the incidents which the race of the source was identified, 89.6 of them, the perpetrators of anti-Asian harassment and stigmatizing statements were white. But that's not the narrative that you get. The narrative that you get is that it's the African American the African American community. Moreover, the perpetrator of anti-Asian incidents were predominantly male. Of the 470 incidents in which the gender of the perpetrators was identified, 76.2% involved men. 76.2. Nearly 2/3 of the victims of anti-Asian harassment were women. That means white men, Asian women. The majority of the situation. We should all double check. We should all triple check. We should all not just take everything for granted, but we should also do a little bit of research and figure out that if what we hear, what we see, or whatever is really what it is, right? And the idea that all of this anti-Asian American hate is coming from the African American community is actually really silly, and it needs to stop. And it's really funny how I've been watching African American males beaten and murdered by cops for 30 years, and there's no African American hate legislation anywhere. And if I'm not mistaken, there was some anti-lynching law that also didn't make it across the finish line last year. So when we move on down the road, I think we should really stop and take a look at these types of things and do a little bit of research. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna go ahead and end this one. Once again, if you liked what you saw, if you have more questions, if you want me to talk about this a little bit more, if you'd like me to get a little bit deeper sometimes, please let me know. I'm going to be reading the comments. The format of the show and this thing is going to change on a regular basis. So Erykah Badu said it best. I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit. I'll see you guys in the next one.